If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe to Learn to Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are tuning in. If you love what you hear, consider leaving a 5-star review, as it will help other podcasters just like you discover this show. You'll find the show notes from this episode at learn2pod.com. Welcome back to Learn to Podcast, the show that will teach you everything you need to know to create, grow, and monetize a successful podcast. I'm your host, Scott Wyden Kivowitz. In this episode, we're going to talk about preparing for launch. This includes creating a launch plan, building anticipation through social media, and designing your podcast artwork and branding. A launch plan is a roadmap for your podcast launch. It should outline your goals, target audience, marketing strategy, and timeline. Here are some key elements to include in your launch plan. Goals. What do you want to achieve with your podcast launch or your podcast in general? Do you want to increase your social media following, generate leads for your business, or simply build an audience for your show? Target audience. Who are you trying to reach with your podcast? What are their interests? Where do they hang out online? Marketing strategy. How will you promote your podcast launch? Will you use social media, email marketing, paid advertising, or something else? Timeline. When do you want to launch your podcast? How much time will you need to prepare? Social media is a great way to build anticipation for your podcast launch. You can use social media to share teasers, announce your launch date, and engage with potential listeners. Here are a few tips for building anticipation through social media. Create a dedicated social media account for your show. Share teasers and excerpts from your podcast episodes. Announce your launch date and encourage people to subscribe. Run contests and giveaways to generate excitement. Engage with potential listeners by answering questions and participating in discussions. Now, your podcast artwork and branding are important elements of your podcast launch. They will help to create a visual identity for your show and attract listeners. Here are a few tips for designing your podcast artwork and branding. Use high-quality graphics and images. Create a logo that is simple and memorable. Use a consistent color palette and style across all of your branding materials. Make sure your podcast artwork and branding are visually appealing and relevant to your podcast topic. Preparing for launch is an important step in the podcasting process. By following the tips in this episode, you can create a successful launch plan, build anticipation through social media, and design a podcast artwork and branding that will attract listeners. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to joining you on this journey to podcasting success. We are all about creativity, innovation, and a touch of playfulness here at Learn to Podcast. We love building this amazing community of ours, and we've been brainstorming some fun nicknames to call our fantastic listeners. And yes, it's official. You're not just listeners. You're part of the crew. Greetings, Podfinders. That's short for Podcast Pathfinders. Thanks for tuning in to Learn to Podcast as we lead the way through the podcasting wilderness. Learn to Podcast does not currently have a sponsor or service to earn money from the show, but we cannot build our show without 3 incredible tools. That's why in lieu of sponsorship, we want to share these incredible tools with you: Descript, Cast Magic, and Transistor FM. These products and services are what make Learn to Podcast possible. Check out our affiliate links in the show notes to learn more about them. And if you sign up, we do make a small commission. Thanks again, Podfinders, for tuning in.